listen to a very special story by veteran Bill Ahrberg in our community. We're going to learn about how he received his 3 silver stars. Join me as we listen to Bill's story.
I was in the Army a very short time before I was on a troop ship, which took 18 days to get us from Seattle to Yokohama, and then 2 days across to Busan, Korea. And as we came off the troop ship, we were told what train to get into. They had a train going to the east front and one going to the west front, and told me to get on the west front. And things were bad then, and nobody knew where the Gooks were, but they were there. And from Busan up to Seoul had a number of tunnels the train had to go through. And these trains had about 6 passenger cars, and they had flat cars in front and back with sandbags and machine guns. And every time we went to a tunnel, we had to stop, and they had to walk out the tunnel to see if the Gooks were in there, or they'd put some detonation charges in there, and then we'd go a ways. We didn't go very fast, But as soon as we got to Busan, they put me on a deuce-and-a-half truck and up to the front with the 3rd Infantry Division, and that's where I was when I got my first silver stars. And it was a couple of days later when I got them. I tell you, 3 days later, I think, we went to the front, and the enemy was about a mile probably down from us, and we were on a ridge line, and we could see them, and they were burning everything in this village. And the North Koreans burned everything, so that if they had reverses and we got shelter in places like that, we couldn't get it because they destroyed it. They sent us up on trucks. I was there an hour, and we left the front just like that, and a convoy. And we were heading out of Seoul to 38th parallel, pretty close. And I was in there about an hour, and they said, we're going to the front right now. Well, the reason this unit was in there is they'd been shot up, and they were getting fillers for officers enlisted. And I was one of the officers, But I got in there, and we went to the front, and nobody knows anything especially if you're a second lieutenant, you don't know anything. And they didn't hardly tell anybody because they didn't know what to tell them. They didn't know where the front was, or how bad it was. And it was bad for the Allied forces. Anyway, we got up a ways, and it got dark. They told us to get off the trucks, and we were going to march up to a ridge line and dig in that night, which we did. We went up, and we were watching the Gooks burn a village, and they were not over a mile from us, probably 3/4 of a mile, but they were coming. And for us, well, we started digging in on the ridge line, And it got dark, and we gave that up. And next morning, just right at daybreak, there was an airstrike, American airstrike. And there's no communication in Korea in the part of the war that I was in, and not even at all any communication from between ground and air. And that's something now. And these fighter planes came in, and they were American B-51s. And my sergeant, platoon sergeant, told me, he said, they're getting it ready to hit us. And he'd been there a while, you know, and they were circling just like buzzards. And I said, oh, they won't hit us. The Gooks don't have anything, but they don't have helmets or anything like that. The Gooks don't, you know. And they said, yeah, they're going to hit us. And they did. Anyway, they hit us 2 times with 5 planes with napalms and let us have it. Well, they didn't get a man because those ridge lines were wide. I mean, very narrow. Third from here to the wall, the ridge line was. Well, they couldn't put a napalm bomb on the ridge line, and if it was one side or the other, it was down there a half mile, and it was a hell of a lot of fire, but it wasn't doing anything. I said, I think we can handle this, and we did that part. But I was a farm boy, you know. They got the 50 calibers going, and they had 650s in each one of them. And they come up the ridge line, and they didn't miss. And they ripped the line here for us, and it was chaos. And I told the boys, I said, this is a 4-row cultivator. These 50s will eat you up, 50 calibers. And I said, you're on your own. And we just split. And here the enemy was. They were down there now, probably half a mile from us. But they weren't coming this way very fast. And they worked us over. Well, when it was over, I'd left in a bunker there with my carbine and my sleeping bag, and that was cold, and that sleeping bag was going to keep you going, because you could, if something wasn't going, you could get in them and stand there, you know. All we had then at that time was a blanket with a zipper. It wasn't any good at all, but we did get later get sleeping bags, which were good, real good. You get in there, zip in, and you can make it. You'll make it anyway. But I found out that the GIs are pretty tough. They're tougher than animals, you know. These kids, most of them were 18, 19. I was 23. I know that because I've said a little prayer there once, telling the Lord I'd like for him to get me to 24. Now I'm 85. He kind of overdid it. But anyway, we've got our forces together, and they said, we're going right back to Seoul, only we're walking. The trucks are gone, the artillery's gone, the Gooks are on us, and if you can't make it, the Gooks will take care of you. And everybody made it. And we headed south. And we got into Seoul. Seoul's now a city of 10 million. and it was big then, I think, but it had been devastated by troops going north and south on the Gooks and us, and there wasn't anything there higher than 10 feet. Everything else, total devastation, gone. Well, it was really cold then, and I'd had a lot of sinus trouble in the United States, and I thought I lost my gear that I came with, and my medicine, it all destroyed. And you know what? I was there for 10 more months, and I was wounded twice a little bit. I called it just barely a little bit. But anyway, we went right back to the front. We walked into Seoul, and we were there about 2 days, and they sent us back to the front.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
You're watching RDMG TV.
Walked into Seoul, and we were there about 2 days, and they sent us back to the front. Walked into Seoul, and we were there about 2 days, and they sent us back to the front. And we went on the east front in the big mountains on the east side of Korea. And the Marines were up there, and they'd been wiped out. And we came up, and they lost two-thirds of their men. They lost. The Marines did. Well, we got into that deal, and we hit the enemy, and it was dark, and first platoon was Burns's platoon, and company commander told him to go right into them. We were up a little ridge line and then up kind of a nipple, and the Chinks were up there, and they were using all AK-47s. And I wasn't in it. I was second platoon. And I was just sitting there waiting, We didn't know what was going to happen. Well, when the first platoon started up that slope, we knew what was going to happen because the Chinks ate them up. And I don't know, but I'm sure that they killed or wounded, and mostly wounded. You don't kill them, very many of these young soldiers. They're hard to kill. They really are. But anyway, I went through Burns and his platoon because they told second platoon, let's go. Let's get it. This is my first time out, and I'd never been with those boys in combat, and they didn't know what the lieutenant was going to do, and I didn't either. But I'll tell you, one of the messages that was with me that took me through at least two of the worst was my dad. And when my dad put me on the airplane at Tulsa to go to Seattle, to get on a boat and go to Korea, he said, son, it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. You've been talking about gooks, and this and that. But when they've got a gun and you've got a gun, you're all the same size. And he said, I want you to know one thing. Don't ever let this country down. I'm telling you this. Don't you let this country down. And that's something I wouldn't do with my dad, because he was a tough German, and he was all business with my brother and I both. And anyway, it wasn't long till I was seeing my dad, you know, in the situation we were in. And I had the 2nd platoon here, and I was ready to go up that ridge line, and I didn't have to go more than, I don't think, over 3 times is from here to the wall. It wasn't very far, you know.
100 yards?
And I told the boys, and they didn't know anything about me. I'd just been there, and I'd never been in combat, but I was getting to. And I told them, I said, I'll lead. And I said, 2 of those squads go to my right, and 2 of my squads go to the left in skirmish lines, and we'll go up to the top. Just before we jumped off to hit the gooks, a hand grenade, and it was a sorry kind. It was a potato masher type concussion instead of a frag, and the frag would have killed me. But this, I saw this in the moonlight. It was bright moon, and probably 10 o'clock at night. I saw this potato masher coming, and it probably was from here to, twice as from here to that bag. But when it hit, it went off, and it hit me. And it hit me in this arm pretty good. But I was so excited, I didn't know it was hit. And I knew one damn thing. My dad said, don't let this country down. That's the one thing I remember. And the men knew I was hit. Nobody else was. But I was so excited that it didn't faze me at all, you know. No pain, nothing. It was something else. But I was in a situation there where we had to go. My boys started to go the other way. I saw them, and I cussed them bad, real bad. And let's go. And I said, they just turned around, and I started running, and I didn't have a weapon, and I was going to kill one with my hands. That's what I was going to do. And those guys were right behind me. I don't know what happened, but the Lord stepped in there somewhere. And the distance from here to where the gooks were was twice as far as from here to that wall. There was no gooks. They were gone. Those son of a guns run up the back side and into the valley. I could see them running. And they had no reason to do that because they'd whipped Burns's outfit bad, and they got most of them. And I had one boy killed, and then I was wounded, and that's all in this deal. I wound up being evacuated and sent down to Busan. I wasn't wounded bad. If you're wounded bad, they sent you to Japan, or if you're real bad, they sent you right straight to the United States. Well, anyway, they flew me down to Busan, and I was in a Swedish hospital unit. This was a United Nations deal, you know. And so I was in there, and they patched me up there 2 or 3 weeks and sent me back to the front. But in my first day there, I got a Purple Heart and blue badge there, Combat Infantry Badge, first star, one deal. Did it all.
Tune in next week for the rest of Bill's story. We'll be right back.
Walked into Seoul, and we were there about 2 days, and they sent us.
Welcome to Donna and Friends. This week we're going to pick back up with Bill Ahrberg as he tells his story of his 3 silver stars. Let's take a look.
The 3rd Silver Star, I earned it on Hill 355 and this was on the west front. And Hill 355 had been lost by the British. The Chinks knocked them out, and they moved our outfit over and got us in a position there to assault the company, the objective. This 355 was very sharp, and I've got the map that we used when we were out on missions. We had these maps, and this mountain was just very steep and straight rocks, just straight rocks, and the Chinks had them. Well, it came time for us to take it, and I told men, I said, you know, the Chinks are up here in that ridge line, and we're coming up, and really they don't have a good field of fire on us because we're right against the rocks coming up, and they're over a little bit. And I said, I don't think we're in much danger till we get right to the top. And so we did that. We got up there, and the Chinks had pulled off 355. And we got up there, and no Chinks. And so anyway, what happened, the Chinks on a deal like this, they did not like our automatic fire, and they tried to hit these objectives in the dark and just run over us. So we were the only way we could make it. They had a lot more men than we did. Was to keep flares and keep some light, and so we'd have a chance there to work on the enemy. But we need to keep those flares going all the time. And you know, a flare just lasts 3 or 4 seconds and it burns out. And it takes lots of flares. But in this case, artillery had enough flares there to keep it lit up. After we started about 8 or 9 o'clock, it was dark, cold, it's September. The enemy started, and they had their signals, you know, flares, red and green, and everybody was trying to read what that was going to come with. And they started the assault. And our company commander at that time hadn't been with us very long. He'd been with us maybe less than a month. And I don't even remember his name because he wasn't with us any time. He's gone. He was going up this mountain, and he lost his footing and rolled about halfway down the mountain and broke some ribs and was gone. That was the end of him. And so I was a first lieutenant, and the other guys were too. And they'd been in the Army a lot longer than I had, but they told me to take charge of the company, become a company. And you couldn't dig in on this mountain because it was rock. You couldn't do that. you know. And the Army, I mean, they started hitting us with mortars and artillery and grenades, and lots of them. And we could see enough light that there was lots of enemies, and they were coming. Well, I had come down 75 feet from my old to platoon down to company. But this was a rock deal, and company wasn't anything. You're just on top of rocks, you know, in an area there. And the enemy hit us, and one of my corporals that had been in the 2nd Platoon, he came running down the slope, and he came in to see me and said, "Lieutenant, I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, what's the matter?" And he said, "The men are going to fold." I said, "What?" They said, they don't want to stay up there. It was kind of like a nipple, a woman's nipple, and it had a nipple sticking up. And my 2nd Platoon was on it, and I was down a little ways, not very far, 75 feet or something. But I said, "Let's go." His name was Farmer. He was a corporal. I got my carbine and I said, "Let's go. We're not going to bug out up there on that. We can't let them get the high ground." I went up there, and the guys decided to stay. And we did. And anyway, we had a fight, and finally the Chinks had enough of it, probably at 11 o'clock at night, and the battle was over, and we had it. And we had quite a few men. Came right in with us, lots of them. And when we got morning and some daylight, you would not believe the number of Chink bodies that were laying out there. I couldn't believe it. I have seen one picture of it, of 355, and all those dead Chinks. But anyway, we held her together, and we did have quite a few casualties. And battalion commander was off maybe a mile in the valley there. And he said, "We're sending up some new troops, and we're going to take you back and get you some more soldiers, take you back to the rear a little ways, 3 or 4 miles on trucks." And that's when the new unit came up, and we came down. And as we got to the bottom on the ground there, this battalion commander said, "Ahrberg," he said, "the Red Cross needs to talk to you." And I said, "Well, not now." I said, "We'll get these trucks in, get the troops in these deucing halves and go back out of the area here and get things going." He said, this Red Cross guy needs to talk to you now." I said, "Okay." He said, in a few words, "My dad was dead. He died." I said, "Not my dad. He wouldn't die. They said, yeah, he was in Chicago at a livestock show, and he did die. And I knew then, that he did. That tore me up.
And we'll be back right after this.
Walked into Seoul, and we were there about 2 days, and they sent us back. He was pretty close to us, but he was tough on us. That really hurt me bad, and I told the company commander, the battalion commander, I said, I need to come home. I said, my brother and sister are younger, and my dad always hated living out there in the country where we lived in Stillwater, and I need, the family needs me. He said, well, that can't happen. We can't give you back. That's it. I didn't know this lieutenant colonel, and he hadn't been with me. And but some of the other officers in the area there, they did know me. And so anyway, they got a chaplain, and he got a fifth whiskey, and he told me to get the cup and drink some whiskey in there. We're going to have a drink. And I did take a drink, a good drink, and he did too. And that kind of got me by there for a little while. And then I got a shower. Only had 2 showers in 10 months. We were animals. We were animals in the mountains. But you know what? I never had a man cower down, and I never had a man even get a cold. He never got a cold on everybody. It's amazing. But they're tough. Those kids are tough. But they were the highlight of my life. Anyway, back here in the United States, Senator Kerr was our senator, and had a lot of power. And the people back home got with Kerr, and in 24 hours from there, I was home. I was coming home. for a 30-day leave. They gave me that 30-day leave to get my affairs together and the family and go back. That's what the deal was. But I had that article in Stillwater, and the colonel saw it, that I was under ROTC, and he called me the next day. The colonel and my dad were real good friends. The colonel had a quarter section of land right out by where we had some land. Anyway, the colonel called me and said, Bill, he said, before you go back to Korea, I want you to visit with me. So we're teaching these kids the right stuff. He said, we got 3,200 of them over there now. Of course, if you were a freshman or sophomore, you had to take it unless you were 4F. But it was a lot of people in ROTC over there. I said, Colonel, there's no way you can keep me out of going back. I said, not if you're a country-bled officer, I mean, lieutenant or captain. They just don't make them. They're knocked over every day. They're gone. It's a new set just all the time. Why I didn't get knocked, I didn't, but got by in pretty good shape. But it was, I'll tell you what that experience did. After taking 440 and 487 and 355, I decided I was going to be probably fairly successful because I wouldn't accept anything else than that. No way. We would. When I came to town, I had a wife, 2 kids, 7-year-old car, and $1,000. And old Harold Greenwood, he went with the deal when I bought Hancock. Did you ever know Harold Greenwood? He was something else. He was a hand. He really was. He came to me and he did the books and everything. He did it all. Day and night for Hancock, and he did with me when I got him. But he came to me after I'd been here 10 days, and he said, Bill, he said, we're out of money. He said, we got to get some more money. Hancock was a millionaire. He made it in the Happy Valley oil field and feed, but mostly that. And he made a millionaire making $3 oil. But anyway, I said, Harold, we don't have any more money. I got a note with Gene Hancock on some of this and some with First National Bank over in Stillwater, because the banker over there will do anything for my brother, Bob, which tomorrow night he'll be 85. I'm 85. He'll be 84. I told Harold, I said, we're just going to have to make it. And I called my brother. My brother is a kind of a high roller. And he didn't mind running the bills and not paying for them very fast. And I did. I wrote him a check that day. And that's why I was out of money, because I hadn't got anything sold and coming back yet. Bob said, are you writing checks here every day? And I said, yeah. He said, you can't do that. He said, don't pay anybody for 30 days and you'll have $20,000. And he's a master at that. So that's what we did, and that's what we had to do. I didn't really like to do it that way. But anyway, Harold said, we can't make it that way. And he said, you know, Cushing Packing offered me a job. And he said, I didn't take it, but he said, I might have thought about it. And I said, get the phone and call him, see if he can still get it. But he never did. He stayed with me till he died with cancer.
Thank you so much, Bill Ahrberg, for sitting down and telling your story of the Korean War and your 3 silver stars. Red Dirt Media Group would like to thank all the veterans in the United States for your service. We'll be back in just a little bit, but first, let's take a look at a speech Ronald Reagan gave concerning veterans on Veterans Day.
A few moments ago, I placed a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And as I stepped back and stood during the moment of silence that followed, I said a small prayer. And it occurred to me that each of my predecessors has had a similar moment, and I wondered if our prayers weren't very much the same, if not identical. We celebrate Veterans Day on the anniversary of the armistice that ended World War I. The armistice that began on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And I wonder, in fact, if all Americans' prayers aren't the same as those I mentioned a moment ago. For all we can ever do for our heroes is remember them and remember what they did, and memories are transmitted through words. We see these soldiers in our mind as old and wise. We see them as something like the founding fathers, grave and gray-haired. But most of them were boys when they died, and they gave up 2 lives, the one they were living and the one they would have lived. When they died, they gave up their chance to be husbands and fathers and grandfathers. They gave up their chance to be revered old men. They gave up everything for our country, for us. And all we can do is remember. There's always someone who is remembering for us. No matter what time of year it is or what time of day, there are always people who come to this cemetery, leave a flag or a flower or a little rock on a headstone, and they stop and bow their heads and communicate what they wished to communicate. I think sometimes of General Matthew Ridgway, who the night before D-Day tossed sleepless on his cot and talked to the Lord and listened for the promise that God made to Joshua. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. We are surrounded today by the dead of our wars. We owe them a debt we can never repay. All we can do is remember them and what they did and why they had to be brave for us. All we can do is try to see that other young men never have to join them. Today, as never before, we must pledge to remember the things that will continue the peace. Today, as never before, we must pray for God's help in broadening and deepening the peace we enjoy. Let us pray for freedom and justice and a more stable world. And let us make a compact today with the dead. A promise in the words for which General Ridgway listened: I will not fail thee nor forsake thee.
Walked into Seoul, and